Imagine for a second, right, that you have a roommate.
Okay.
But you didn't choose them.
Yeah.
You can't break the lease to kick them out. And, well, they are, frankly, a total nightmare.
Like a bad college dorm situation?
Yeah, but so much worse. They aren't just messy or loud. They are actively, relentlessly plotting your complete ruin.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, like they know your schedule down to the minute. They know the exact tone of voice that makes you irrationally angry.
They know all the buttons to push?
Exactly. They know the specific anxieties that keep you awake at like 2 in the morning.
Yeah.
And their ultimate goal isn't just to, I don't know, steal your TV or ruin your credit score.
Right.
Their goal is to quietly pour out your lifeblood while you're distracted.
I mean, that is a terrifying premise. If that were a movie script, it would be this psychological thriller. You'd be checking the locks on your bedroom door every single night.
You would. But the twist is the locks don't even matter because the roommate is already inside the room. They are inside your own mind. And today we are doing a deep dive into a stack of sources that serve as basically a survival guide for dealing with this exact scenario.
It really is. It's essentially the ultimate 17th century field manual for the Christian soul.
Right. We are examining 3 monumental works by the English Puritan theologian John Owen.
And we're specifically looking at of the Mortification of Sin in Believers, which he wrote in 1656, then Of Temptation from 1658, and finally, Indwelling Sin in Believers from 1667.
Yes. And our mission today, like the central question we really want to tear apart is this. How do these 3 specific books, which were written over a decade apart, work together to form a cohesive, unified strategy?
How they practically apply.
Exactly. How do they actually help a person overcome this internal enemy and live a holy life? Because as you're reading through these sources, it becomes so clear that John Owen didn't just write abstract, high-level theology.
No, not at all.
He wrote a unified theory of internal warfare.
He had to, really. I mean, we have to consider the context of who John Owen was.
Yeah. All right, let's set the stage.
He was an Oxford academic, sure, but he was writing during the mid-1600s. This was the era of the English Civil War.
Which was incredibly bloody.
Immense political, social, and religious upheaval. He was actually a chaplain to Oliver Cromwell. So he saw literal warfare firsthand.
Wow.
Yeah, he was navigating the highest, most chaotic levels of national power. Yet amidst all that external carnage, he focused his sharpest analytical lens inward.
Because he realized the real war was inside.
Exactly. He recognized that the most dangerous battlefield wasn't, in the fields of England. It was inside the human chest.
I want to pause on that because the psychological depth he brings to this is just staggering. And the reading sequence of this field manual we're looking at is so intentional.
The order really matters.
It does. We're going to look at Indwelling Sin first, which is the enemy intelligence. It diagnoses the internal foe.
Right, getting to know the roommate.
Yeah. Then we move to Temptation, which is the alert system. That's how the external world triggers that internal enemy. And finally, Mortification, which is the offensive action plan.
It's a masterclass in psychological architecture.
Okay.
He diagnoses the pathology completely before he ever prescribes the treatment.
And for you listening, whether you are deeply grounded in your own faith or you're just like fascinated by the history of psychology and human nature, this is going to dismantle a lot of assumptions you might have about willpower and desire and the architecture of habit.
It completely flips the modern narrative.
It really does.
Yeah.
So before we can talk about fighting this enemy, we have to define it. What does Owen say this internal traitor actually is?
Well, to understand his baseline, we have to look at his concept of the law of sin.
The law.
Right. Owen pulls this heavily from the Apostle Paul's writings, specifically that agonizing internal struggle Saul documents in the book of Romans chapter 7.
Where Paul is talking about doing the things he hates.
Exactly. Paul famously writes about not doing the good he wants to do, and instead doing the very evil he hates. And Owen takes that raw confession and builds a massive framework around it. He argues that indwelling sin in a believer is not merely an occasional bad choice.
Wait, let me stop you there. Because the modern tendency, like how we think about it today, is to define sin as an event.
Right, an isolated incident.
Yeah, a slip-up, a mistake, something you do when you are, I don't know, tired or stressed at work, and you can just fix it with a little more discipline or a better morning routine.
And that is the exact reductionism Owen is fiercely fighting against. He completely refuses to define it as an isolated event. He defines it as a law.
And he means that literally.
Very literally. He means it's an active, abiding, effective principle, Think about the law of gravity.
Okay.
Gravity isn't an event that just happens to you occasionally on a random Tuesday.
Right, you don't just suddenly experience gravity at 3 p.m.
Exactly. It is a constant, unrelenting, invisible downward pull. It operates whether you are actively thinking about it or not.
Yeah. So indwelling sin is basically a gravitational force inside the human heart.
Yes. It is a resident law that constantly inclines the mind and the affections toward evil. It exerts a continuous pressure. It's always seeking to bring the soul into captivity. It doesn't sleep. It doesn't take vacations.
This brings us right back to the roommate analogy. It's an inside job. It's not a burglar trying to break a window.
It's the treacherous tenant who already holds the key to the guest bedroom.
Right. But here is where I struggled when I was reading the sources, and I think a lot of people will hit this exact same wall.
The persistence of it.
Yes, because in classical Christian theology, if a person has experienced spiritual rebirth, like if they are saved or regenerated, why is this roommate still living in the house?
That's a big question.
Didn't the cross supposedly evict the enemy?
It's one of the most difficult concepts for people to grasp, honestly. And it's where Owen introduces a framework that theologians often call his anthropological realism.
Okay, let's translate that for everyone. Anthropological realism. Break that down for me.
Sure. So it stands in stark contrast to anthropological idealism.
Idealism meaning?
Meaning this false, overly optimistic belief that humans are basically blank slates, or that once a person experiences a religious conversion, their underlying nature is instantly, fundamentally cured of all dark impulses.
Like a magic wand just wipes the slate clean.
Right. Idealism says the house is completely pristine the moment you sign the deed. Realism, which is Owen's view, says human nature is profoundly fractured.
So how does he reconcile having a fractured nature with the concept of salvation? Because those seem at odds.
He draws a really hard, bright line between justification and sanctification.
Okay.
In justification, the condemning guilt of sin is entirely removed. The legal penalty is paid. The believer is declared righteous. However, the presence and the power of indwelling sin remain active in the mortal body.
I see. So the legal ownership of the house has changed, but the squatter is still hiding up in the attic.
That's a great way to put it.
And I imagine the squatter isn't exactly thrilled about the new management.
Furious is a much better word. And this leads to Owen's pretty terrifying description of sin's enmity against God.
Enmity.
Yeah, enmity meaning active, inherent hostility.
Yeah.
Sin is not just some neutral flaw. It isn't the blind spot in your personality. It has a natural, visceral loathing for anything spiritual.
It's actively fighting.
Always. Owen points out that indwelling sin never seeks a truce. It never compromises.
The sources bring up this idea of a natural aversion to spiritual duties, and honestly, reading that is highly relatable.
Oh, absolutely.
You know, you can sit and binge watch a documentary about, like, deep-sea creatures for 4 straight hours without breaking a sweat.
Completely absorbed.
Right. But the absolute second you try to sit in silence for 10 minutes of prayer or meditation, it feels like a physical weight is pressing on your chest.
It's suddenly agonizing.
It is. Suddenly, you remember an email you forgot to send 3 weeks ago, and it feels like a literal life or death emergency that you have to handle right that second.
Owen would say, you are experiencing the friction of enmity right there. That is the law of sin actively opposing the promptings of the Holy Spirit.
Wow.
It uses distraction as a weapon to pull the soul away from communion with God.
But the way it pulls you away isn't always through brute force, right?
No, rarely.
Because if this internal enemy just demanded that you ruin your life and burn down all your relationships today, you would immediately recognize the threat and fight back.
You'd call the cops on the roommate.
Exactly. What fascinated me in the reading is how Owen dissects the deceitfulness of sin.
Yes. Brute force is rarely sin's first tactic. It operates almost entirely through illusion and deceit.
Because it's smart.
Extremely smart. The law of sin understands human psychology infinitely better than we do. If it presented its true endgame to you, you would recoil in horror. So it uses a highly sophisticated mechanism of beguilement.
Let's trace that mechanism. How does the roommate actually convince you to hand over the keys? The text says sin targets the intellect first. It darkens the mind.
Right. The mind is the eye of the soul. It is responsible for perceiving reality, evaluating consequences, and determining what is true and what is good.
So if the eye is blinded,
then your whole moral compass spins completely out of control. Sin begins its deceit by drawing the mind away from a clear view of God's character and the reality of the consequences.
creates a fog.
Exactly, a thick fog. And once the mind is clouded, it moves to the affections, your desires. It entices the senses by misrepresenting reality.
By lying about what you're actually getting.
Yes, it promises profound satisfaction,
Yeah.
but hides the absolute emptiness that will inevitably follow. It whispers that this illicit pleasure will solve your stress, or cure your loneliness, or validate your worth.
The sources give these chilling examples of the specific pretenses sin uses. It minimizes the action. It tells you, oh, it's just a small thing.
Just this once.
Right. Or my personal favorite trap, you've worked so hard lately, you've been so disciplined, you actually deserve this little indulgence. It literally weaponizes your own fatigue against you.
It creates a bespoke rationalization for every individual. It knows your specific brand of exhaustion, and it tailors the lie to fit it perfectly.
It's so insidious.
And simultaneously, while it is elevating the allure of the compromise, it is actively hardening the heart against spiritual things, making them appear tedious, restrictive, or just boring.
Which brings up the most sobering quote in this entire stack of research. It's the pint of blood metaphor.
Oh, that quote is intense.
It really is. Owen writes, "The beginning of sin is as the giving away of a pint of blood. The progress of it is the pouring out of a man's lifeblood."
It just perfectly highlights the inherently progressive nature of corruption.
Right. And he follows that up by saying, sin aims always at the utmost. Every rise of sin is toward its height. I literally had to read that sentence 3 times.
It's a heavy realization.
It means there is no such thing as a harmless sin. Because we like to categorize our flaws, right?
Oh, definitely. We build a hierarchy.
Yeah, we put murder and treason in the really bad box. And we put a little bit of pride, a little bit of gossip, maybe some greed in the manageable corks box.
This is personality traits.
Right. But Owen says every single tiny indulgence is mathematically calculating the trajectory toward full-blown rebellion.
Think about a single mutated cancer cell. It does not want to just peacefully coexist with the healthy tissue.
No.
Its biological imperative, its law, is to consume the host entirely. Indwelling sin aims at the utter ruin of the soul.
It wants everything.
It might be satisfied with a small compromise today, sure, but only because it knows that compromise weakens the tissue for a larger invasion tomorrow.
Wow.
Understanding this trajectory is the absolute foundation of Owen's enemy intelligence. You have to respect the absolute lethality of the threat.
Okay, so the intelligence briefing is terrifying. We have an active, hostile, deceitful law of sin residing in our nature, and its endgame is our total destruction.
That's the baseline.
But if this combustible fuel is always inside of us, what causes it to ignite? Like the roommate might be plotting, but what gives them the opportunity to actually strike?
That is the crucial pivot from Owen's first book to his second. If indwelling sin is the combustible fuel, temptation is the external spark.
A match.
Yes. In his treatise of temptation, Owen builds an intricate alert system to help the believer recognize the spark before it makes contact with the fuel.
He grounds this deeply in the scene of Jesus in the Garden of Gethsemane right before his arrest.
Matthew 26.
Yeah, Jesus tells his disciples, "Watch and pray that you enter not into temptation."
And Owen extracts a vital theological and psychological distinction from that single sentence. He differentiates between being tempted and entering into temptation.
We really need to make this distinction crystal clear, because I know people who live in a state of perpetual crushing guilt just for having a tempted thought flash through their mind.
Oh, absolutely.
They feel like the sheer presence of a dark thought means they have already failed.
And Owen would pastoral that guilt away immediately. It is biologically and spiritually impossible to exist in a fallen world and not be tempted.
Right.
The environment is completely saturated with it. Jesus Christ himself was tempted in the wilderness. The appearance of a temptation is not a sin. It is merely an event in your environment.
Just weather.
Exactly. You cannot control the birds flying over your head, as the old proverb goes.
But entering into temptation, that's letting the birds build a nest in your hair.
Precisely. Entering into temptation means you cross a threshold. You move from being a passive recipient of an external suggestion to an active participant in an internal negotiation.
You pull up a chair for it.
You allow the thought to linger. You begin to entertain it, turn it over in your imagination, and let it converse with your desires.
Let's push on the mechanics of this. In my head, I pictured temptation like a shady salesperson knocking on your front door. The knock is just being tempted, opening the door and letting them pitch you their product while you sit on the couch. That's entering. But even that feels a little too passive for what Owen is describing.
It is too passive. A salesperson analogy implies a simple transaction. The salesperson wants your money. They don't necessarily want to burn down your house.
Good point.
Owen views temptation much more nefariously. It is not just a pitch, it is the activation of a sleeper agent. Or, to use Owen's own visceral imagery, temptation acts like a specialized key turning the lock on a prison door that is already occupied.
So the world knocks, and the treacherous roommate inside hears the knock, recognizes the code, and runs to unlock the door.
That is what he calls the unholy alliance. Temptation is the sudden, perfect alignment of an external opportunity with an internal corruption.
They meet in the middle.
Right. The external bait doesn't magically create a sinful desire out of thin air. It simply draws out the poison that was already lurking in the bloodstream. The bait perfectly matches the appetite.
So the alert system isn't just about scanning the horizon for bad things. It's about recognizing the atmospheric conditions, the seasons, as he calls them, when the internal roommate is most likely to answer the door.
Owen maps out the psychology of human vulnerability brilliantly here. He identifies specific seasons when the unholy alliance is most likely to form.
I have his list of seasons here, and looking at them through a modern lens is fascinating because they are almost entirely counterintuitive. They really are. If you asked the average person on the street when they are most vulnerable to making a catastrophic moral failure, they would probably say, when I'm depressed, when I'm grieving, or when I've hit rock bottom.
When you're weak.
Yeah. But Owen's first season of extreme vulnerability is unusual prosperity, when everything is going great.
And the danger of prosperity is that it breeds a false, intoxicating sense of security.
How so?
Imagine a person who just received a massive promotion. Their bank account is overflowing, their health is perfect, and everyone is praising them.
Sounds like a good day.
It is. But in that state of comfort, the human urgency for divine dependence just plummets. We stop feeling our need for God because we feel entirely self-sufficient.
We don't need help.
Exactly. Comfort breeds spiritual lethargy. The guards on the watchtower put down their weapons and take a nap.
And when the guards are asleep, the enemy doesn't have to scale the walls. They just walk right through the front gate.
Exactly.
Which feeds directly into his second season, spiritual slumber.
Spiritual slumber isn't just about physical tiredness. It is the slow, silent death of spiritual urgency.
What does that look like practically?
It is when the vital practices of the Christian life like prayer, self-examination, community become mere mechanical routines.
Yeah.
You are going through the motions, you are reading the words on the page, but your affections are entirely disengaged.
You're checked out.
Completely. And
Wow.
in a state of slumber, you lose your spiritual reflexes. You don't recognize the specialized key turning in the lock until the prison door is already wide open.
The third season he warns about is self-confidence. He uses the Apostle Peter as the prime example.
A classic example.
Jesus tells Peter he will deny him, and Peter essentially says, maybe these other guys will, but not me. I'm built different.
And that arrogance is the ultimate blinder. When you declare your own invincibility regarding a specific weakness, you immediately cease watching for it.
You think you've already won.
You create a massive psychological blind spot. Indwelling sin loves a self-confident host because the defenses are voluntarily dismantled. The moment you say, I am immune to this specific failure, you have painted a massive target on your own back.
The fourth season surprised me the most, honestly. He warns that we are highly vulnerable during times of great spiritual enjoyment.
Yes.
When you are experiencing a profound spiritual high, a moment of deep clarity or joy in your faith, why in the world would a spiritual high make you vulnerable to a fall?
There are two mechanisms at play here. First, the human emotional crash. We cannot sustain peak emotional states indefinitely.
What goes up must come down.
Right. When a person comes down from a spiritual mountaintop, say, after a profound religious retreat or a moment of intense prayer, they often feel a sense of accomplishment. They relax. They feel they have arrived spiritually, and their vigilance drops.
Oh, that makes sense.
Second, Owen leans into the broader Puritan theology of spiritual warfare. He argues that the enemy counterattacks most fiercely, immediately following a spiritual victory, attempting to steal the joy, induce a rapid stumble, and plunge the believer into a whiplash of shame.
So you hit a high, and immediately you get targeted to bring you crashing down so you feel like a hypocrite.
Exactly. The whiplash is the goal.
Okay, so we are tracking the seasons. Prosperity, slumber, self-confidence, and spiritual highs. We have the alert system online. But what happens if the system fails?
which it will sometimes.
Right? What happens if you don't intercept the temptation and you actually allow it to cross the threshold into your mind?
This brings us to what Owen calls the hour of temptation, drawing from a phrase in the book of Revelation. And this is the most dangerous psychological state a human being can enter.
The hour. It sounds ominous. What defines the hour?
The hour of temptation is the point of critical mass. When a temptation is allowed to parley with the heart long enough, it mutates.
It changes shape.
It stops being a gentle external suggestion and transforms into an all-consuming internal obsession. It hijacks the intellect entirely. It fixes the imagination so intensely on the sinful object that the rest of reality just fades away.
It's like extreme tunnel vision.
Exactly. Extreme tunnel vision. And worst of all, it entangles the affections so deeply that your own mind turns against you. You actually begin to argue in defense of your own destruction.
That is so wild to think about. You become the defense attorney for the crime you are actively planning to commit.
Yes.
You start telling yourself, God wants me to be happy and this will make me happy, or I'll just do it this one last time to get it out of my system.
Precisely. The intellect is fully compromised.
Yeah.
The fog has completely covered the eye of the soul. And Owen issues a severe, urgent pastoral warning here. Do not flatter yourself into believing you can hold out once the hour hits.
It's too late by then.
Once you reach that critical mass, the gravitational pull is almost impossible to break by sheer human willpower. The entire strategy of the alert system is to ensure you never let the temptation reach its hour in the first place.
Man, I feel like we've just walked through a haunted house.
It is dark.
I'm terrified. I'm paranoid. We know the roommate is inside, plotting. We know the external triggers are constantly broadcasting sleeper agent codes, waiting for us to experience a moment of prosperity or self-confidence so they can strike.
It's a lot to carry.
Am I just supposed to sit on the couch in a state of perpetual, vibrating anxiety, just playing defense and hoping I don't fail? There has to be an offensive strategy. How do we take the fight to the enemy?
You cannot survive playing only defense. You have to go on the offensive. And that is the entire purpose of his most famous treatise, of the mortification of sin in believers.
Mortification. It's a heavy, kind of archaic word.
It is. It literally translates to putting to death. It is drawn from Romans 8:13, where Paul writes, "For if you live according to the flesh, you will die. But if by the Spirit you put to death the deeds of the body, you will live."
Okay, so it's a biblical mandate.
Yes. Owen takes this mandate and constructs an active, intentional, and relentless process of draining the life out of indwelling sin.
This is where we get the quote that is basically the tagline for Owen's entire legacy, right? Be killing sin or it will be killing you.
Exactly. It is a stark, binary reality. There is no demilitarized zone in the soul. Owen establishes that mortification is not some optional extra credit assignment reserved for monks, mystics, or super saints.
It's for everyone.
It is the fundamental baseline daily requirement for every single believer. Because the law of sin is always acting, always conceiving, the believer must be always killing.
Okay, stop right there. Because this is where the modern reader, and frankly, this is where I hit a massive wall of friction when reading this.
I don't blame you.
Always be killing. This sounds miserable. It sounds like a recipe for a panic attack. It sounds like a 17th century version of exhausting, try-harder Christianity where you are just white-knuckling your way through life, sweating bullets, trying not to do bad things.
It sounds like pure law.
Yeah. What happened to grace? What happened to the easy yoke? This really borders on legalism.
If John Owen were sitting in this room right now, he would vigorously validate that exact concern.
Really?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, he spends a massive portion of the book aggressively tearing down the very thing you are worried about. He calls it legal mortification, and he absolutely despises it.
Okay, what does he mean by legal mortification?
He means attempting to kill sin through the sheer force of human willpower, relying on strict rules, personal vows, ascetic penances, or basic behavior modification techniques.
So relying on yourself.
Right. He insists with absolute theological certainty that these methods are completely and utterly useless for truly putting sin to death.
But wait, if someone makes a vow to stop drinking or stop lying, and they use their willpower to force themselves to stop, haven't they killed the sin?
No, they have merely caged it.
Caged it.
The sources use a phenomenal agricultural analogy here. Trying to change your internal nature through willpower and behavioral rules is like trying to eradicate a toxic weed by simply snipping off the leaves.
Okay, I can picture that.
You can hack at the leaves all day long. You can make the surface of the garden look impeccably clean to your neighbors. But the root of the weed is still buried deep underground.
It's still alive.
It is still gathering nutrients, it is still alive, and the moment your willpower fatigues, and it will fatigue, that weed is going to sprout right back through the soil, usually thicker and more aggressive than before.
So behavior modification is just landscaping. It's symptom management, not a cure. You are attacking the fruit but ignoring the root.
Exactly. Self-reformation is not sanctification. A Pharisee can modify their behavior. Only the Spirit can mortify a sin. And Owen is uncompromising on this mechanism. The Holy Spirit is the only principal, efficient cause of mortification.
But practically speaking, what does that actually look like? This is where theological concepts feel incredibly slippery to me.
It can feel abstract.
Right. Because from the outside, me using sheer willpower to ignore a craving and the Holy Spirit helping me overcome a craving look functionally identical. I'm just sitting there, not doing the bad thing.
Right. The external behavior is the same.
Yeah. So how do I know which one is happening and what is my role? If the Spirit does the work, do I just sit back, relax, and let God magically zap the desires out of me?
It is neither passive resignation nor frantic self-reliance. Owen operates on a paradigm of Spirit-empowered effort. Let's break down the mechanics of how the Spirit actually works in this framework, because it directly answers your question about willpower.
Please do.
Willpower requires you to expend your own limited cognitive and emotional energy to resist something you still deeply want. It's a dam holding back a river.
Yeah, and eventually the dam cracks.
Always. The Holy Spirit, however, does not merely help you suppress a dark desire. The Spirit changes the desire itself.
The Spirit changes what you actually want.
Yes. Owen describes the Spirit acting as a refiner's fire, striking at the very root of the heart's affections. The Spirit operates by altering your spiritual taste buds.
Oh, that's interesting.
To use a modern equivalent, think of neuroplasticity. When you form a habit, you are carving a deep riverbed in your brain. Willpower tries to force the water to stop flowing. The Spirit's work of mortification actually carves a new, deeper riverbed that reroutes the water entirely.
That is a profound paradigm shift. It's not just stop wanting the poison, it's Spirit, give me such an overwhelming appetite for real food that the poison looks repulsive.
Exactly. You draw upon the living presence of the divine. The power to change doesn't originate in your depleted human reserves. It flows from the inexhaustible grace of the Spirit. You fight, yes, but you fight with weapons that are not your own.
And this naturally leads to what the text calls the Christocentric focus of mortification. There is a beautiful, piercing quote from Owen here. Set faith at work on Christ for the killing of thy sin. His blood is the great sovereign remedy for sin's sick souls.
This is the ultimate antidote to the anxiety and legalism you were worried about earlier. Owen's entire system of internal warfare is inextricably anchored to the cross.
It's fascinating because he spends hundreds of pages forcing you to look at the absolute pitch-black darkness of your own heart. He forces you to look at the treacherous roommate in terrifying detail.
He doesn't pull any punches.
No, but he only does that so you will immediately look away. You don't stare at your sin to wallow in a spiral of shame and self-hatred. You stare at the disease just long enough to realize how desperately you need the doctor, and then you fix your eyes on the remedy.
Owen teaches that mortification is most effective and most permanent when the soul is completely captivated by the beauty, the grace, and the glory of Christ.
You crowd out the bad with the good.
When your heart is filled to the brim with the love of God, the cheap, deceptive allurements of indwelling sin simply lose their magnetic power. They lose their charm. You starve the weed of sin by depriving it of the soil of your affections, and you plant something infinitely more beautiful in its place.
We have covered so much ground here. We have the enemy intelligence from indwelling sin. We have the alert system from temptation. We have the Spirit-empowered action plan from mortification.
All three pieces.
I want to bring this all together into the unified strategy. How do these three massive theological works blend together to shape the actual boots-on-the-ground daily life of a human being?
They create a comprehensive closed-circuit feedback loop of spiritual vigilance. They cannot function in isolation.
Okay, walk me through the loop.
Mortification provides the action. You kill sin by the power of the Spirit. But to know what specifically to kill, and when the battle is imminent, you need temptation, which provides the alert system.
Right.
And to understand why those triggers are so dangerous in the first place, you need indwelling sin to remind you that the corruption still resides in your nature.
Diagnosis leads to vigilance. Vigilance leads to dependence on the Spirit. Dependence on the Spirit leads to deeper diagnosis. It just loops.
It's a self-reinforcing cycle of holiness. And the sources draw out several incredibly practical directives from this loop.
Well, let's wrestle with these directives. Let's talk about the friction of actually trying to apply this on a random Tuesday afternoon. The first directive is to cultivate self-knowledge. Owen says you have to know your natural temperaments and your specific vulnerabilities.
This requires brutal honesty. You must map your own psychological terrain. If you know that you are deeply prone to pride and arrogance when you receive praise at work, you have to treat praise as a hazard zone.
Even though praise feels good.
Especially because it feels good. If you know you are prone to despair and escapism when you are criticized, you must prepare your defenses before the performance review even happens. You have to know the specific blueprints the roommate is using.
The second directive is to flee the first approaches. Intercept temptation early. But what does that actually look like in the modern world? In the era of smartphones, the first approach of a temptation is often a notification on a screen. It happens in a fraction of a second.
Which is why the interception must be equally instantaneous. Fleeing the first approach means you absolutely refuse to let the thought parlay with your heart.
You don't even say hello.
The moment you recognize the knock on the door, you do not look through the people. You do not ask who is there. You slam the deadbolt by actively, violently turning your mind elsewhere, to scripture, to prayer, or even to a healthy, demanding physical distraction.
Change the channel immediately.
You break the cognitive loop before the hour of temptation can begin to form.
You do not negotiate with terrorists. The third directive is one that completely subverts human instinct. Bring the lust to the gospel.
This is crucial.
When you do stumble, or when you feel the heavy weight of an ugly, shameful desire, our natural instinct since the Garden of Eden is to hide, to cover it up, to sit in the dark and feel miserable until enough time passes that we feel we can face God again.
And that instinct is exactly what indwelling sin wants. It isolates you. Owen says you must drag the sickness directly into the agonizingly bright light of Christ's grace.
Just air it all out.
Do not wait until you feel clean to approach God. Bring the filth directly to the cross. Expose it. As the quote said, "His blood is the sovereign remedy. You cannot be healed if you refuse to show the doctor the wound."
The vulnerability of that is staggering. And the final directive is to watch and pray continually. Maintain a rhythm of communion with God.
This is the ultimate preventative measure. Cultivate a rich, daily, vibrant relationship with the divine. Why? Because a soul that is actively feasting at a magnificent banquet is simply not going to be tempted to eat scraps out of the garbage alley.
That is such a vivid picture.
You defeat the lesser desires by satisfying the soul with the greatest desire.
That imagery of the banquet versus the garbage is exactly the kind of perspective shift Owen is driving at. But I want to address one final critical piece of friction here. If someone listens to this entire framework, always watching, always killing sin, always mapping vulnerabilities, they could easily conclude that the goal here is absolute flawless perfection. And if they aren't perfect, they're failing.
And that conclusion would devastate Owen. He offers a deeply comforting theological synthesis to guard against that exact despair.
Okay, good.
Owen's goal for the believer is not a state of sinless perfection in this mortal life. He deems that biologically and theologically impossible due to the sheer reality of anthropological realism. The law of sin remains until death.
So if the goal isn't zero sin, what is the metric for success?
Progressive, steady, hard-fought holiness. Owen argues that the true definitive sign of spiritual health is not the absence of the struggle, it is the presence of the fight.
Or presence of the fight. Let that sink in.
Think of it this way. A corpse feels no opposition.
Wow.
A dead body does not feel the wind pushing against it. It just lies there. But a living person feels the resistance. If you feel the agonizing tension between your dark desires and God's will, if you are grieved by your sin, if you are exhausted by the daily warfare of mortification, that tension is the very proof that you are spiritually alive.
The struggle means you're breathing.
Exactly. The roommate is fighting so hard precisely because they no longer own the house. The battle itself is the evidence of life.
That reframes everything. The struggle isn't a sign that you are a failure. The struggle is the pulse that proves you are alive.
It changes how you view the whole Christian walk.
To summarize the incredible plunging depth of John Owen's field manual, the Christian life is a state of ordered conflict. It is a realistic, eyes-wide-open existence. We don't pretend the internal darkness isn't there.
No, we stare right at it.
We face the active hostility of indwelling sin. We maintain a vigilant watch against the deceitful sparks of temptation, and we relentlessly pursue the mortification of our deepest flaws, not through the exhausting white-knuckle effort of our own willpower, but solely through the transformative, inexhaustible power of the Holy Spirit.
It is a radical call to arms, but it is an armory built entirely on a foundation of grace.
And I want to remind you listening to this, while we have spent the last hour discussing what sounds like a grim, bloody war manual, it is actually designed as a roadmap to peace.
True peace.
It is a guide to spiritual vigor, resilience, and profound joy. We don't fight for victory, desperately straining to earn God's love or prove our worth. We fight from the victory that has already been definitively won by Christ.
And to leave you with a final thought to ponder today, in the deepest corners of these texts, Owen briefly touches on a mystery. He mentions that God, in his infinite sovereignty, sometimes permits a believer to be thrust into a season of fierce temptation, not to destroy them, but to test them, to humble them, or to display grace.
What does that mean for us?
Well, it raises a provocative question. What if the areas in your life where you experience the most relentless, exhausting, humiliating battles with indwelling sin are not actually signs of your spiritual defectiveness? What if those specific agonizing arenas are the exact places where God is actively dismantling your destructive self-reliance in order to display the deepest, most profound depth of his sustaining grace?
That is something that will completely reframe the way you view your own weaknesses. If the house has a treacherous roommate, you don't just ignore them. You dig deep, you expose the plots, and you rely entirely on the true owner of the house to change the locks from the inside out. Yes, it's exhausting work, but when the storm hits, the house stands. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Keep fighting, keep looking at the cross, and we'll see you next time.